We all know the golf swing takes a lot of work. There's a lot of repetition that's needed in order to master any new movement pattern. That's just the way the brain learns. But to what we're going to talk about today can actually make an instant impact on your ball striking. That doesn't mean you're going to go out and do it perfectly every time. That's where the repetition comes in and the practice. But what you are going to find is that for once you're going to start to really understand what controls the ball flight. And when we talk about ball flight, there are a couple things that we're specifically dealing with. One is trajectory. And the better golfer you become, the more important trajectory becomes in being able to score in all conditions consistently. And so trajectory is a huge piece that is important to me, especially with the professional golfers that I work with, especially being in Florida where it's windy a lot. If you're in an area that's very windy, you're going to want to pay very close attention to this video. The second thing is just directional control. And for those of you who've read the instructor's manual for level 1, we've talked a little bit about the right hand versus the left hand and how those things work. And today that's what we're going to talk about specifically, is what the left hand does in the golf swing, how the bones and joints and muscles need to be in alignment for control and for power. And specifically when we're dealing with the left hand, there's a couple areas that we're going to focus on. One, we're going to focus on the back of the hand or the wrist. And two, we're going to focus on the elbow. And we know at address, we're trying to keep everything in neutral so there's minimal chances for injury. We're connected to our power source, our core, and those things. At impact, those positions change because we don't want impact and address to be the same, because we're trying to generate power and stability and control at impact. And so some of those things are going to change versus where they were at address. So if you've looked at some of the videos I've done, like on Tiger Woods Dynamics on YouTube, video's been seen a million times where people have looked at the positions that he's at address and at impact are very, very different. And that's how they should be. That's just the way that the dynamics of the golf swing work. So when we talk about the left arm, and specifically in the downswing, which is what we're going to focus on today, it has a very, very important specific role to do. One, its primary role, the back of the left hand, the wrist, this whole area of your arm, is predominantly controlling club face through the hitting area. It does it on the backswing as well, as we have some rotation in that arm. But as we get into impact, where this guy's facing, if we have a good grip, is going to really help you track where the club face is pointing. It's a simple measurement. So you know that if you have a proper grip and that left hand is in a good position at impact where it's nice and flat and it's pointing directly at the target line, down the target line, then the club face should be pointing there as well. If it's pointing out this way, the club face is open. If it's pointing this way, the club face is, of course, closed. So when we're dealing with that, we also want to look at the left elbow, because this is an area where I see particularly the more inconsistent golfers. Doesn't mean they don't have a phenomenal golf swing. You can have a great golf swing, and people walk up to you all the time on the range, and they watch you hit balls, but you're spraying it all over the place, and you don't know why. A lot of it has to do with your elbow, because of the fact that what a lot of golfers do is that as they're coming down into impact, particularly if they get stuck on the way down, this arm is externally rotating very quickly through the hitting area. So you can see if I just rotate my arm, so right now it's internally rotated, so I've got to twist it in. And then if I just spin it really fast, what's happening to my hand? Well, it's turning really fast. And now if I put a golf club in there, so you can see right now the club face would be square. If I back up just a little bit, and now as I turn it, it's wide open. And then as I rotate it again, it's shut. So now I'm trying to time this movement through the hitting area. Not very desirable, because at the same point that this guy's rotating, the wrist can rotate independently. So now I'm not rotating my arm at all, but now I'm spinning the club face all over the place. So I can have all of these great positions going back, and if I'm trying to time this rotating at thousands of degrees per second through the hitting area, I'm never going to do that consistently. So that's why this video is so incredibly important, because what we're going to do is give you drills on how to get that in the right position at impact so you're consistent on every golf shot. So, and let's talk about what that looks like. So as we're going back, at the top of the swing, shoulders are down and in, everything's still maintained. Obviously this has got to come out of the box a little bit. And when that happens, the left shoulder comes out of the box a little bit. The arm rotates just a little bit. This is an important part of the swing, because if I didn't do that, if I just kept that arm in neutral, the club shaft would be vertical. I'd have a really steep swing plane. And then as I went to the top, I'd be really, really steep. So all we need to do is, as we're going back, that left arm rotates a little bit, and now I'm on plane. So that arm has basically rotated from just outside of neutral. It's slightly internally rotated, and then as it goes back, it rotates about 50, 60, 70 degrees. Just depends on the swing and the build. But as we get to the top, now my arm is in this position versus neutral. So as it's rotated, I don't want to start to spin that down, because look what happens to my golf club. So now I'm just externally rotating my wrist and my arm, and now the club face is out of position. What we do want to do is actually the opposite. It slightly increases on the way down. This is a minimal amount. This is not something that you're going to go and work on in your swing. So I'm just kind of giving you the nuts and bolts of what's actually happening. This is not something that you'll probably have to work on at any point in your golf swing unless you have a specific issue with it. But what happens is, as that arm's internally rotated a little bit, if I just started coming down, specifically with the shoulders, I'm going to come over the top. But if I let that arm rotate just a little bit, and again, this is just a few degrees from here, as I start everything back down, notice how the shaft has a flattening appearance. And I'm exaggerating this. Again, it's more than what's actually happening. But as I do that, the shaft starts to come down, back down on plane instead of the opposite, which would be over the plane. So we don't want that, obviously. So the point of this is that as this internally rotates a little bit more, as I come down into impact, notice where my elbow is pointing. So I'm going to put a shaft here. It's pointing right down the line. That allows me now to control the amount of rotation that's happening in the swing, because the club face is rotating shut through the hitting area. It has to. As that's happening, the movement's coming from here instead of from my arm. So now, instead of having two pivot points where the shoulders or the arm's spinning in the shoulder socket and the wrist is spinning, we've eliminated one. And now what that does is that elbow gives us a reference point, because it's going to be pointing almost down the target line. It will be slightly internally rotated, but we just use 90 degrees as a reference. In other words, this is 0, where it's pointing straight out. If I turn it 90 degrees, now my elbow is pointing down the target line. So now as I come into impact, and that's why I have this impact bag here, as I come into impact, I can check that my elbow is pointing down the line, and now my wrist is flat. So now, instead of trying to time all this flippy rotational motion coming from two different places, I'm only doing it at the wrist. And so now that takes the focus off of this guy. So we've eliminated one variable in the swing, and now we just have this guy. And this is a very important part to train as you're learning to control impact. And this is how we typically do it. So as you go to the top of the swing, what I would want you to do is put the golf club down and just use your left arm. Get it into a position that as you come into impact, the left elbow is pointing down the target line, and start rotating your wrist into impact. Now, this is not something where you're keeping it wide open and at the last second trying to flip your hands over. This rotation is actually happening almost from the top of the downswing, because you don't want to be trying to time an early rotation. You want to be starting to rotate it shut or back to square early. So now as I come down, the club face is squaring early, looking at the ball already, and then as I come down, it's minimal rotation. If I kept it wide open, so now I'm going to take this arm or this wrist and leave it open, now I've got the club face wide open, and now I've got to really flip my hands over at the last second. That's no good. We want this rotating gradually throughout the whole downswing in a natural rotation, so that it doesn't have something where you're just trying to flip it at the last second. That's a terrible feeling for golfers who have really good golf swings, but every single shot is just hoping to save it. And that typically has more to do with how they start down, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So without a golf club, what you want to do is you can take your right arm out of it for right now. As you go to the top, start working on keeping your shoulders shut and pulling your left arm down so that your elbow's pointing down the target line, and you're rotating your wrist. So you're going to separate these two movements. You're not rotating your arm. You're rotating your wrist into impact, and you're going to do this just with your left arm. Now, why wouldn't I want to get to the top and